It was the 2nd of September 1883. A Sunday evening, and the last of summer still clung to the riverside meadows outside the town of Stratford, in Fairfield County, Connecticut. The state of Connecticut was, in those years, a place of prosperous contradictions. Its coastal towns and fertile farmlands retained the quiet rhythms of an older America, while the industrial tide was rising rapidly in cities such as Bridgeport and New Haven, just a few miles distant. Church bells marked the hours, horse-drawn wagons moved along unpaved roads, and respectable families gathered in well-lit parlours as night fell. On the road between Stratford village and the surrounding farmlands, a young woman set out alone on a walk she had made many times before. She knew the road well. She knew the stone walls, the maple groves, the soft sound of Raven Stream below its small bridge. She had been visiting her fiancé that evening, and the hour had grown late. She declined his offer to escort her. She was not the sort of woman who accepted concern with much patience. She never arrived home. Her name was Rose Clark Ambler, and the events that followed her disappearance that night would disturb the community of Stratford for years to come, and remain, to this day, without a final answer. Rose Clark was born on the 5th of September, 1857, in Stratford, Connecticut. She was the daughter of Captain Nathan W. Clark, a prosperous ship owner who held a position of considerable standing in the maritime community of Fairfield County. The Clark household was one of privilege and reputation, and Rose was raised accordingly, educated in the accomplishments and social refinements expected of a young woman of her station. She grew into a figure of some notice in the community. Accounts of her appearance varied considerably in the press. A New Haven newspaper remarked that she was hardly up to the average in good looks, yet hastened to add that she was intelligent and was highly esteemed and universally liked. Her temperament appears to have been vivid and sociable. She was known for a lively and confident manner that drew the attention of many suitors during her youth. She was not, it seems, a woman who lacked for admirers. By her late teens, Rose became engaged to a young sailor. He departed on a voyage, and his absence extended beyond what had been anticipated. Letters, it was said, grew infrequent. Rose, impatient, restless, did not wait indefinitely. During this period, she attracted the attentions of Norman Ambler, the son of a local farming family. The engagement to the sailor was dissolved. Within a brief interval, she married Norman Ambler. The exact date of their marriage is not recorded in available sources, but it is known to have taken place in the late 1870s. The marriage was not a tranquil one. Norman's cousin and business partner, a man named William Lewis, had come to live and work under the same roof. Lewis was described by those who knew him as an ideal Connecticut countryman, a man of oiled hair, full blonde whiskers, and plain blue flannel clothes. He was jealous by nature and proud. Rose, it was later established, fell in love with him. Lewis returned her affection. The arrangement within the household grew untenable. When Norman Ambler discovered the nature of his wife's connection with Lewis, he sent his cousin away. He and Rose began to quarrel in earnest. Their separation followed soon after, and divorce proceedings were initiated. Rose cited her husband's alleged intemperance as the legal ground for the dissolution. Norman Ambler would later reveal, during sworn testimony, that this characterization had not been entirely accurate, and that it was Rose who had told him plainly she preferred the company of William Lewis. A daughter had been born of the marriage. She remained with her father and his widowed mother. Rose returned to the home of Captain Clark. Despite the collapse of her marriage and the circumstances that had preceded it, Rose Clark Ambler remained a respected and admired figure in Stratford. Her charm appeared undiminished, and her position within the community, anchored as it was to the name and standing of her father, survived the scrutiny that a divorce invariably attracted in that era. Several respectable men sought her company and her hand. In the end, she chose William Lewis, the same man whose presence in her household had brought her first marriage to its ruin. Lewis was at this time engaged in the trade of a vegetable peddler, travelling his regular routes through the towns of Birmingham, Shelton, and Derby. He had begun construction of a house on his parents' land, intended to serve as the marital home. The couple announced their intention to marry on Thanksgiving Day of 1883, yet there were shadows beneath the surface of this arrangement. During Lewis's business travels, it was reported that he had spoken to associates in a manner that suggested some frustration with the social expectations Rose placed upon him. More troublingly, the police would later learn of a young woman residing near Birmingham with whom Lewis maintained regular contact, a woman whose parents were said to possess considerably greater wealth than Captain Clark. Whether Lewis's interest in her amounted to anything more than an acquaintance was a matter of much subsequent speculation, but the reports left an unpleasant impression upon those who heard them. Meanwhile, the tension between Lewis and Rose's former husband had not subsided. The two men met at some point in the period preceding the murder. According to Rose's mother, Jenny Clark, who received this account from Lewis's own sister, Annie Wetzel, Norman Ambler had issued a warning to Lewis directly that either Rose or Lewis would die before they ever married. Rose herself appeared unconcerned. She was accustomed to walking alone between the Clark family home and the Lewis farmstead, a distance of approximately 1.5 miles, along a road that wound beside the river and through stretches of open meadow. The route passed through sections that, after dark, were remote and poorly lit. Friends cautioned her against making this journey unaccompanied in the evening hours. She dismissed their concern. When William Lewis offered to escort her, she habitually declined, reasoning that he needed to rise early for his morning trade. On the evening of Sunday, the 2nd of September 1883, Rose visited Lewis at his father's house. The conversation was animated, and the evening passed pleasantly enough. The couple discussed their forthcoming wedding. Rose stayed later than was customary. It was already past 9 in the evening when she finally rose to leave. Lewis walked with her as far as the Raven Stream Bridge. There, as she had done before, she bid him good night and continued alone into the dark. At 7 o'clock on the morning of Monday, the 3rd of September 1883, a 10-year-old boy named William Roberts was driving cattle along the Orono Road when he came upon a figure lying near a stone wall in a meadow. He recognized at once that something was gravely wrong. The boy went directly to the nearby home of Mr. Albert Curtis. Mr. Curtis, joined by Mr. Anson Darts and subsequently by Mr. Alfred Wakerley, returned to the scene with the child. The woman lying near the wall was identified as Mrs. Rose Clark Ambler, daughter of Captain Nathan W. Clark. The body was found lying upon its back. There were dark bruising and deep marks upon her neck, consistent with strangulation. Swelling was present above the right eye, indicating that she had received blows to the head. The overall condition of the remains left no doubt that the death had been violent. The men covered the body respectfully with a tarpaulin and summoned Dr. Knott, under whose guidance the remains were transported to the home of Captain Clark, situated a short distance away. Deputy Coroner J.A. Joyce was promptly notified and began assembling a jury for a formal inquest. The Stratford police commenced their inquiries, enlisting the assistance of Pinkerton detective J.S. Wood. A reward of $300 was offered for information leading to the discovery of the perpetrator. This sum was subsequently raised, upon the direction of Governor Waller, to $1,000. The ground surrounding the site told a considerable story to those who examined it carefully. A short distance from a grove of maple trees, investigators observed the impressions of broad-soled boots proceeding in a direct line, followed at some interval by the marks of men's shoes. 2 parallel furrows in the earth, each approximately 1 inch in width, suggested that a body had been dragged, with the heels scraping the ground, toward the wall. Broken branches on a maple at the wall's edge indicated that the victim had seized hold of them as she was lifted or forced over. Her palms, it was later noted at examination, bore injuries consistent with this struggle. Crucially, the clothing worn by Rose Ambler was found to be dry, despite the violent thunderstorm that had swept through the area late on Sunday night. Investigators noted that the blood found upon her garments did not appear to be her own, a detail that suggested she had inflicted injuries upon her attacker in her resistance. What remained troubling was that several dwelling houses stood no more than 100 feet from the site of the attack, and the Orono Road was a thoroughfare in regular use even after dark. The coroner's inquest opened on the 4th of September, 1883, the day following the discovery of the body. It continued in closed session for several weeks. Medical testimony was offered by more than one physician, and the findings were not entirely in agreement. An initial examination, conducted by Dr. Knott and Dr. Cogswell, suggested that Rose had been violated before her death. This conclusion was subsequently disputed by Dr. Porter, a physician of considerable reputation in Connecticut, who had previously given expert testimony in the Mary Stannard case. Following a second autopsy, Dr. Porter stated his firm opinion that there was no evidence of violation, and this view was shared by Dr. Buchholz. The cause of death was formally established as strangulation. A significant development arose from a forensic examination conducted by Professor White of Yale University. Beneath the fingernails of the deceased, investigators had recovered matter identified as human skin and blood corpuscles. Professor White's analysis determined that this material belonged to a white person. This finding effectively excluded from serious consideration several suspects against whom racial prejudice had initially been directed, and focused attention more precisely upon those within Rose's immediate circle. Examination of William Lewis's carriage yielded stains upon the laprobe that were initially believed to be blood. However, upon Professor White's analysis, these stains were determined to be either syrup or molasses. Fibers found upon Rose's clothing were reported to match those of the laprobe, prompting investigators to theorize that the body may have been transported after death. The dry condition of the victim's clothing, in spite of the night's heavy rainfall, lent weight to this theory and led some investigators to speculate that the murder had not occurred where the body was found. Deputy Coroner Joyce and State Attorney Fessenden noted, when speaking with William Lewis in the course of the inquest, that they observed what appeared to be scratches upon his right hand. Lewis denied that any such marks existed, and when he extended his hands for inspection, the examiners reported that they were no longer visible. His demeanour throughout the interview was described as nervous. If you are finding this case as compelling as we do, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us continue researching and presenting these forgotten stories from history. We read every comment, so please let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now let us continue. The inquest sat through the whole of September, receiving testimony from a considerable number of witnesses. Among them was a man named Mr. Malloy, who stated that on the night of the murder, on the Old Farm Road, approximately 1 mile from where the body was later found, a carriage had passed him at speed. He believed the driver to have been William Lewis, though under questioning he acknowledged he could not be entirely certain of the identity. He described the carriage as unusually well finished, its varnish discernible even after the rain. No arrest warrant was issued. The evidence, though suggestive, remained circumstantial. As the inquest proceedings drew toward their conclusion, in late September of 1883, the weight of testimony had collected most heavily around the figure of William Lewis. A number of witnesses had given accounts that, taken together, presented a troubling picture of inconsistency in his conduct and statements. William Smith, a restaurant proprietor in Birmingham, Connecticut, testified that Lewis had entered his establishment on the day following the murder and remarked, "If I were in Stratford, I could put my hand on the man who killed Rose." The remark was noted as indicating a degree of knowledge that Lewis had not disclosed to the investigating authorities. A Mrs. E. Osborne testified that Lewis had told her he had been awake for much of the night of the murder, a statement directly at odds with his sworn testimony to the inquest, in which he maintained that he had retired at his customary hour following Rose's departure. Frank Curtis, a resident living near Stratford, stated that he had observed Lewis driving his carriage in an ox pasture on the night in question. Another witness, John Powell, told the inquest that on the Thursday preceding the murder, Lewis had informed him that he had decided not to occupy the house he had been constructing, and intended instead to seek tenants for it. This testimony was received with particular attention, given that the house had been built in direct anticipation of the forthcoming marriage. Lewis himself was called before the inquest. He remained composed in his demeanour and dismissed the testimony of Mr. Malloy, who had identified his carriage on the road that night, with what many observers regarded as an inappropriate lightness. When asked about Mr. Malloy, Lewis looked toward the jurors and stated that he did not consider Malloy a man with whom he associated. The remark caused considerable disquiet in the room, given the gravity of the occasion. Reverend M. Houghton, of the Church of the Messiah in Stratford, drew wide attention when he addressed his congregation on the matter from the pulpit, declaring that Lewis's conduct was consistent with a man of low instincts, and that he was precisely the type capable of such an act. It was also reported in the press that when asked about Rose's death among acquaintances, Lewis had responded with the words, "What in hell do I care about it?" His apparent absence of grief was noted extensively and condemned openly. On the 29th of September, 1883, the coroner's jury delivered its finding. The coroner's jury delivered its formal statement on the 29th of September, 1883. The jury found that Rose Ambler had come to her death by being choked at the hands of a person or persons unknown to them. It then continued that from William Lewis's prior connection with the deceased, from his testimony, from his conduct since her death, and from the evidence presented, suspicion pointed toward him. Coroner Holt did not issue an arrest warrant. By the applicable law in Connecticut at that time, a coroner possessed the authority to detain a suspect for no longer than 24 hours, and the evidence before the jury, though suggestive, was insufficient to support a formal charge of murder. Coroner Holt forwarded the matter to Stratford's grand jurors and sent a telegram to State Attorney Fessenden, urging that the case receive immediate attention. No indictment followed, despite extensive further investigation, during which Lewis was observed making what one witness described as a visit to a savings bank in Birmingham in a manner that suggested preparation for departure. No arrest was ever made. The case grew colder as the weeks turned to months. The press, which had covered the inquest with considerable appetite, did not spare its commentary. The magazine Puck observed that Connecticut lacked the proper machinery of law to deal adequately with such cases, that by the time the medical examiner, the coroner, and the inquest had run their separate courses, any murderer of average intelligence had been afforded ample time to escape or to conceal his tracks. Mark Twain, who was residing in Connecticut during this period, recorded his contempt in a private note. He killed a woman in Con. No matter, it is a crime they do not punish there. The murder of Rose Ambler was placed alongside those of Mary Stannard in 1878 and Jenny Kramer in 1881 as evidence of a persistent failure of justice in the state. 9 years passed. On the 27th of September 1892, William Lewis was involved in a brawl in a tavern and received a blow to the head. He was found unconscious on the road some hours later and was taken to a hospital, where it was determined that his skull had been fractured. His condition was described as precarious. In his delirium, he cried out that he was guilty of murdering Rose Ambler. Whether these words were the confession of a dying man or the disordered utterances of a mind unmoored by injury has never been resolved. The records do not show that he was ever formally examined on the matter, or that the statement was formally recorded. In April of 1884, a man named Charles H. Rugg, an African-American man under indictment in Long Island City, who was known to have committed 2 other murders by strangulation and who had visited Stratford on occasion, was briefly considered as a possible suspect. He denied any involvement. The connection was never pursued with vigour. In 1905, a life convict at a state penitentiary named J. H. Leroy claimed that the true killer of Rose Ambler had been a man named Tommy Gardiner. The statement was not taken seriously by those who heard it. William Lewis was never charged. He was never tried. The house he built upon his parents' land, raised in anticipation of a wedding that never took place, stands as a footnote in Stratford's history. Rose Clark Ambler was buried in Stratford, Connecticut. She was 25 years of age at the time of her death, 2 days short of her 26th birthday. On the Orono Road, where the stone wall still stands amid the meadow, the only sound now is the water of Raven Stream, moving in its ancient course beneath the bridge, the same bridge where a young woman said good night, and turned and walked into the dark.